All right, Margaret, it's your time.
Thank you, John and Susan. Welcome, everyone. Very pleased that you're able to join us. Search engine optimization is more important now than it has ever been. Google handles more than 5 billion searches every single day, and that opens up a phenomenal opportunity for businesses to reach prospective customers online. Now, the number of businesses doing that has absolutely skyrocketed. So the competition is fierce to get onto the first page of search results where people will see you. As a consequence, what used to be enough to get yourself recognized on the web is no longer sufficient. And that's why you need supercharging to give yourself a little extra edge. Now, I'm not going to talk about paid advertising at all today. I'm only talking about organic search, which is what they call the free kind. So let me show you how we're going to do the supercharging. We're going to combine two existing very powerful tools. One is search engine optimization, but the other is performance analytics. Now, both of these already exist, but when you put them together, the combination is much bigger than the two individual halves. First, let me give you a definition of each of them so you know and we're all on the same page. Search engine optimization means to design your website pages to increase the probability of being near the top of Google search results. You want to be on the first page. The algorithm that the search engine software uses is based on approximately 200 different ranking factors. Obviously, we are not going to talk about 200 factors today. However, some of them are more important than others. They carry more weight, and therefore some of those are the ones I'm going to talk about today. They determine whether or not you make it into the list at all, and if so, where, on what page. One of the things you may not have thought about is that most SEO is done individually for particular pages in your website. It is true that some of the 200 ranking factors do apply to your website as a whole, but as we go through this presentation, you'll see that many of them are SEO done for an individual page, and so you might want to keep that in mind. The definition of performance analytics is really easy. It's a report that has a bunch of numbers in it. Numbers and analytics sort of are the synonymous. Now, there are many analytics packages out there that are available, but I want to use three as my examples for today: Google Analytics, Google Keyword Planner, and Google Search Console. Because Google has more than 90% of the search market, they have the best access to detailed information, and therefore that's why I like to use them. They're also free, although Google is making it harder and harder to use Keyword Planner without spending some money. But because they're free and they have some of the best data, they're a good choice. Many of the other analytics packages actually get data from Google and then reformat it somewhat and perhaps add a few other things to do it, but a lot of it is Google data. I want to tell you that analytics is the version called Universal, is what's in my presentation tonight. There is another version called G4. I did not have any examples of that today. Why does supercharging work? Let's talk first about performance analytics. It doesn't matter what the numbers are that you get, you're going to wish they were better. And yet, performance analytics are just a passive report. There's no real action that happens there. So you have to guess whether or not to expect better numbers the next time. And you mainly wait and hope that the next time the numbers will be better. Similarly, on search engine optimization, you do have action. Search engine optimization is active oriented. You do something, but you don't really know if it worked or not. You can guess that it worked. You can wait and see if the numbers change. You can hope you did it right. But again, we don't want to be guessing, waiting, and hoping in this kind of an environment. It's too competitive. So we want to get rid of that with our supercharging. This is what happens when you combine the two together. I have termed this my supercharging machine. That's how I'm going to refer to it. And we're going to start on the left-hand side, and we're going to put in some SEO features. So we'll pick one and we'll implement it. And rather than waiting, guessing, and hoping, we will know and take action and improve, because we're going to move from the left side of this chart to the right side. And after we've done an action, we're going to look at the analytics and see if it worked. Did it change what pages we're on? Did we get more traffic? And analytics are wonderful in that they often give you clues and guidance for what you should do next. So we're just going to cycle through this pair multiple times, and I'm going to give my presentation in that same format, because that's how you would do it if you were implementing in your own website. So this is what I call the supercharging machine. Now you might say, well, sounds like a good idea, but doesn't this mean that I have to do twice as much work? I have to do both SEO and performance analytics? The answer is no, it's not more work. And the reason is that before there was a huge amount of trial and error. And so it was very time consuming, very frustrating, and could cost a lot of money. By doing it this way, it's not only faster, it's much, much better. You get much better results. So time is money. So I would strongly recommend that you use this process. We want to talk now about some of the features that we're going to address. I told you that I picked some that cover a lot of the ranking factors. So here's what is the outline for today's talk. First, we're going to pick the right keywords. When I say keywords, I'm using it synonymously with keyword phrase, because usually it's not just a single word, it's usually several words used together. Then we're going to put the keywords in the right places in your website, because it does matter where you put them. Then we're going to add some links and talk about the value from an SEO standpoint of having blogs, images, and videos. So this is the outline of the different SEO actions that we're going to talk about. So let's start with the first one. The very first one is pick the right keywords. But the obvious question is, what are the right keywords? The answer is the right keyword is whatever people type in. This is probably the single most important slide in my entire talk. The right keyword is what people type in. Why? Because unless your web page contains text that closely matches what the person typed in, the search engine will not put you in the results list at all. It might be spoken. Now that so many people use Siri or Alexa or something, whether it's literally typed or if it's spoken, works the same way. By the way, I told you much of the SEO is done page by page, and this is one of them. You will need a different keyword for each of your website pages. All right, so let me give you some examples. You actually know this already from doing searches yourself. The right keyword is what people type in. So I did some experiments. First, I typed in who won the World Series in 1992. And you can see that it came up with these entries. All of the data is real data, by the way. They're all real websites, all real data. This is a screenshot of a search engine results page called SERP for short. And you can see that sure enough, it did a text matching. Here's 1992 World Series, and it knows what we're doing. Then I thought, well, maybe that one's just too easy. I'll try a different one. This time I typed in woman's pink jacket. It's springtime. So sure enough, here we see that the search engine algorithm has found entries which match that text. Women's pink coats and outerwear, women's jackets, pink coats, women's pink jackets. You can see that it has done a match against what people typed in. These are the keywords. I thought I'd really put it to the test. Surely I would fool it this time. Fitness trainer for couch potato over 50. After all, I have to fit into that pink jacket. And even then, the search engine was able to find websites that had those words in it. Fitness plan for middle-aged couch potato. Fit after 50, get off the couch. Couch potato to fit. It found those words. And you can say, wow, this is what I said. I said, wow, it was smart enough to find things like that. How did it ever know that I was going to type those things in? This is where we move from the left-hand side of our Supercharge machine to the right-hand side and look at some analytics, because you and I may not know what people type in on any given topic, but Google knows. They keep statistics on absolutely everything. And this is one of the reports from the Google Keyword Planner. I pretended here that I was a house painter. Let's say I'm setting up my website and I want to decide what keywords I should use. This is what people type in. This was a very long list. It just went on and on. I just picked some of them to show you. You can see these are all the different things that people typed in and the volume. This is the average number of monthly searches. And this cute little blue graph here is actually a 12-month graph. Most people have their houses painted in the warm months in the middle of the summer. Not many people have their houses painted in December and January. So this shows you that there's some high volume keywords. Lots of people type these in. And it's very tempting to use just those, but the competition there is very high. So for a small business, the recommended best practice is to pick a couple of these really popular keywords, but also to pick some that have somewhat less competition. They do have less volume, but you might have a better chance to get on the first page. Now, I told you that analytics can also give you guidance on what to do. And if I'm a painter and I'm looking at this, I might be surprised that so many people are interested in the keyword painted brick house. They type that in. I might decide I want a page in my website that talks about painting brick houses. There are also some on this side. There seems to be a lot of interest in what does it cost. So I might want to add another page to my website that talks about the costs and how they might anticipate what the cost would be and what's involved. So this is where the analytics give us guidance. They first tell us what keywords are very popular and also some guidance of topics that we might want to include in our website. So that's how we use the analytics side of our Supercharge machine. Now let's go back to the left side and tackle another one of our SEO actions. The second one I had in the list was to put those keywords in the right places in your website. Why? Because that's where the search engine software is going to look to try to figure out what in the world is your page talking about. Google is actually very smart with their word recognition and their artificial intelligence. Still, you have to give them a little help. So you should put that page's keywords. Remember, every page has its own keyword. That page's keywords should go in the header, in the subheadings, in the first sentence of the first paragraph, and at least one more place in your content, and in the image alt text. Image alt text is a technical term that refers to essentially an image caption, which people cannot see, but the search engine does see it. And that's how it knows that you have a picture on your page and what is it talking about. I refer to this as the formula, all the places where you should put a keyword. And I have some examples for you. Again, they're real examples that I found. And here, this particular company has selected as its keyword for this page, commercial plumbing. They had another page that was about residential plumbing. You can see it exactly follows the formula. Here's the keyword in the heading, in the subheading, in the first sentence of the first paragraph, again in the subheading, again in the first sentence of the paragraph. So you can see they have put this keyword in all those places mentioned in the formula. What they're really doing is waving a big flag in front of the software saying, we're ready for commercial plumbing. If anybody types in commercial plumbing, pick us. Let's look at another example. Again, here's what they've used. It's a keyword phrase. I told you it can be more than one word. Adoption is in the header, in the first sentence of the first paragraph, a second time in the content, in a subheader, again in the first paragraph, a first sentence, again in here. This time, the words are not always exactly the same. Google does understand similar phraseology and helps you capture a few more of those variations. And so feel free to use a little bit of variation as you're filling out this for each of your pages. There's another place where you have to use the keywords. Do you remember when we were doing our searching right at the beginning of my talk, and we were talking about women's pink jackets? That keyword is also here. That's what I typed in. I told you a keyword is what people type in. And here you see it. It's in the URL. It's in the title. This is called the title. And this is called the metadata in the smaller font. You find it here. So for every one of your pages, not only have you picked a keyword for it and put it in your page itself following the formula, you must also write one of these little descriptions that's going to go in the SERP. And you have to put the same keyword in this SERP paragraph, I'll call it, that you have on its page. And you have to write one of these for each one of your pages. Let's go on. It's now time to move from the left side of our Supercharge machine to the right side and look at the analytics that go well with trying to find out, did the search engine recognize what we were trying to use as our keyword? Did anybody type in the keyword that we selected? And where are we in the results list? Are we on page 1 or are we on page 27? This report will tell you all of those things. Over here, again, this is real data, so I wiped out the names here. These are all the things that people typed in. People typed in all of these at least once. And this particular organization were in the results list for this, what people typed here. They were in the result list 72 times. This must have been a high volume keyword. They were in the results list 322 times. But the question is, yes, but what page were we on? You can tell that from the far right entry here, which is position. They did a wonderful job here on the second one. They were in position 3, which probably means they were on the first page. If you're between 1 and 5, you're probably on the first page. And that is really valuable. You know, from your own experience, you're most likely to just pick something from that first, maybe the second page. And as a consequence, the click-through rate is much, much higher. The click-through rate is just the mathematical, you take the number of clicks compared to the number of impressions, and it's a 19% click-through rate. Excellent number. This one's also very good because this is an average position. So half of the time, this particular keyword brought this organization to the first page. Half of the time was less than 5. And some of the time it was more than 5. So that one also, that particular keyword also got a good click-through rate. So in general, the better your position, the better your click-through rate's going to be. And these are all the things that people typed in that got you into the results list. Now, this organization was very excited, but I can't say the same for the next one. This is also real data. And this organization was devastated when they found out that their entries were on position 70, 80, 90. No one was ever going to see their product ever. They were just horrified. Do not panic. There are 3 things you can do. First of all, look to see if this keyword is even something that you care about, because sometimes Google gets strange answers and you can just ignore them. That was true of one of these, it turns out. Another thing you can do is look at the particular page that is associated with this, whatever this keyword was that somebody typed in. And by the way, Google Search Console will tell you which pages went with each of these things that people typed in. So look at that page and consider whether or not you need to rewrite it to strengthen the SEO you have on it. The third option, which is going to happen to you at least once, and that is you will discover that some other larger company, usually with more money to spend on SEO to do all 200 ranking factors instead of only a handful, may have already captured that keyword. And you're just never going to make the first page when competing with them, in which case just move to a different part of that list that we saw in Keyword Planner, pick a different keyword and just move on. Sometimes it's better to admit that you just need to change. So now we've been through 2 cycles of our Supercharge machine. We have picked the right keyword, we have put it in the right places, and we've checked to see whether or not we are in a good position on our in the list, whether we made it the first page or maybe we're close, and just a little more SEO with a few more of the ranking factors will make it onto the first page. So let's try going on now to our third item. Here we want to add links. And first, I'm going to talk about internal links. Here is the ranking factor that matters in this case, and that is how easy is it to navigate around your website. An internal link just points from one of your own pages to another one of your own pages. I'm sure you've seen these many times. You will usually see some text that's maybe underlined or in a different colored font, something like that. And if you click on it, you know it will jump you somewhere. And that's what I tried to illustrate here. And these are so easy to do. They're very user-friendly. People like them. So I would encourage you to sprinkle a few of these around on every page. I would put an internal link on every page of your website pointing to some other place there. That's different from the external links. These are much, much harder to get, but they also count more in terms of SEO value in the ranking. Why you want external links? A while back, a year or two ago, Google decided that it wanted to try harder to figure out which web pages were worthy of being near the top. And they had 3 criteria. Did it illustrate expertise, authority, and trustworthiness, called EAT. That was the way you remembered. Expertise, authority, and trustworthy. And when someone else's website points to you, they are essentially endorsing you or just acknowledging that you're worth someone going to. And so it counts quite a bit in the ranking factors. Now, there are some that are relatively easy to get, and that is an external link from directories or ratings, credentials, things like one of the 10 best caterers. Here's a list of the 10 best caterers in Glenview, or here is the all the dentists in the Association of Licensed Illinois Dentists, or all the members of such and such a chamber would count as an external link if the chamber's website points to you. Those are all excellent, and I would encourage you to get as many of those as possible. The ones that really count the most in terms of ranking factor are websites here at the bottom, which they themselves have very high trust and authority. These are much, much harder to get, and depending on what your business is, it may or may not be obvious even who those people are. But if indeed you can get some, it's well worth your effort. Now, one of the things that has happened is there are websites that will sell you a link. They'll say, oh, we'd be glad to point to you if you would just pay us a small fee. Google definitely frowns upon that. They've tried to make sure that you get penalized even if they find out you're doing that. So please don't be tempted to buy links. It's not encouraged at all. All right, this is one of my favorite analytics, and it goes very well with the external links. This is called the Google Analytics Channel Report, and it tells you where the people came from that they come to your website. Again, this is real data. The item here called referral tells you how many people came to your website via these external links. And you can see this organization is doing very well. 20% of their traffic is coming via these external links. So they're actually getting double SEO here. One is that there is a link, and 2, that people are using it. So they're actually getting 2 counts there. So it's very useful. And if I were to click on the word referral, it would actually tell me which links they were. But this is a very useful report. It's the same report. People ask me frequently, well, gee, now that I've got social media, I've got Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever, do I still even need to worry about search? And the answer is yes, you do. You should have both. And you can see that illustrated here. This particular organization is getting 40%, almost 40%, 39% of their traffic is coming from search. You can see that right here. Whereas despite having both Facebook and Instagram, they're only getting about 7% of their traffic. So it became clear to them over time that where their customers could be found, and they did much better with search. Overall, more sales are achieved through search than through social media. but it definitely depends on what type of business you have. Some are just the opposite, but in general, search brings in more. There's another item, I don't have a little arrow next to it here, but perhaps you decide to run a paid advertising campaign. If you look here at this number, this will tell you whether or not you're getting your money's worth. This is how much of the traffic came via paid advertising. You can see it's 2 is much less than what they get with organic search. Interesting result. We're now going to go yet again to the left side of our chart and do another one of our search activities. All right, this time we're going to talk about the value from an SEO standpoint of adding blogs, images, and videos. They contribute jointly to a large number of the ranking factors. And here are some of them. First of all, Google really likes new content. They also value the fact that people come to your website. The more people who come to your website, they feel, oh, it must be a really great one. We should put it up in front and reward them for having such a good website. So blogs are perfect for both of these first two, because by definition, you're putting in new content and it inspires people to come and visit your website multiple times to see what you've posted most recently. So these are especially good things for blogs. The other two help especially with length of time spent on a page. This is one of those page by page things. The number of views that a given page gets and how long people stay there. Once again, the search engine algorithm interprets this, that it's a desirable website and of interest to people and deserves to be near the top. Images and videos really catch people's attention more so than text. And as a consequence, they are particularly good at these things. Blogs are also very good for length of time spent on a page. You may have noticed blogs that are really long. The reason they're really long is that they're trying to keep people on the page. And so they just write really long ones. You'll see that, I'm sure, if you're on the lookout for it. Another couple comments here. Every page should have an image. Every one. It can be a photo, it can be a diagram, it can be an infographic, any of those things. It doesn't have to just be photographs. Remember to put in alt text with your keyword underneath them. Don't forget that part. These things draw people's eye, first of all, and they also take time. Hopefully they'll read the infographic, they'll follow the diagram. You want all of those things to happen. And if you do put in a video, which are even more important from an SEO standpoint, Google is really pushing video right now. The attention span of most people is between 1 and 2 minutes. So they recommend that your video be less than 2 minutes if you're going to put it on your website. For any longer video, they suggest that you put it out on YouTube. Of course, Google owns YouTube, so that's an easy suggestion for them to make. You may not have thought about it, but a blog is treated just like any other page on your website. As a consequence, you have to treat it with all the things we've just talked about. That blog should have a keyword of its own. It should include internal links, and it too should have images, whether they be videos, diagrams, or infographics. So they're a wonderful opportunity to have an excuse to put in more of those websites, or I'm sorry, more of those keywords. Excuse me. Now we look at the analytics. We've now moved to the right-hand side of our Supercharge machine to see how are we doing at getting people to view our page and how much time do they spend there. This is a Google Analytics page view report, and it tells us exactly what we want to know. Listed here are all the pages that anybody looked at on our website. The first one is usually your home page, and that usually has the biggest number. This column says how many views were there of each page. And this one said, what is the average time people spent on the page? Exactly the kinds of things we want to know, because those are ranking factors. Let's pretend here for a moment that you are a wellness company, and this is your home page. And the second one maybe is a page that talks about fitness. And the next one might be a page that talks about nutrition. And this one might talk about meditation and relaxation. And so what are some takeaways here in terms of guidance that the analytics are telling us? First of all, is telling us that for whatever reason, the people coming to your website are a whole lot more interested in fitness and nutrition than they are in meditation and relaxation. They don't seem very interested in that particular topic. So you might want to act on that one way or another. Then if you look at the time spent on the page, you notice that this one is substantially larger than any of the other ones. Wow, maybe that's a blog where you just put in a new video. You tried video for the first time, and by golly, it worked. So you might be inspired to try some more videos. Look at this one. I believe I called this our fitness page. It has a very, very short time on it, only 27 seconds. Well, that might be, for sure you should do something about that page. It should definitely be longer than 27 seconds. You can put out more text. You can use more images, diagrams, another video, but you might want to consider beefing that one up a bit. So that's, again, guidance to you as to what you might want to do next as you cycle through your supercharging machine. I want to talk a little bit about this last column, because bounce rate is a ranking factor, all right, but it is a negative ranking factor. It means you want this bounce rate to be as small as possible. You do not want any. You will always have some. I don't know how they managed to have zeros down here. That's wonderful that they got zeros. And you definitely want it to be under 50%, and under 40% is even better. A bounce is when you look at a page, you take one glance at it, you say, oh no, this is not what I wanted at all. And you immediately exit. I'm sure you've done that at some point. That's a bounce. You do not want those. So you should be very careful as you look at this particular chart to see, do you have any pages that routinely people bounce? One could be that it's just unattractive and is not of interest to them. Another reason can be because it doesn't really match the little entry that you wrote that was on the SERP, on the results page. Maybe they don't match. Maybe the person who came here thought you had done a bait and switch on them. Not a good idea. Another reason that they could be bouncing is that you don't have enough on the page for them to read. They actually read everything that was there. And although you had a nice, pretty picture, you had almost no words. That's bad. One, because there probably wasn't a keyword, and two, because it doesn't keep a person on the page long enough to count as them even doing a viewing. So those are some things that you want to care about with bounces. It's quite an important value. One last thing. Even though we've been through our 4 cycles I told you we were going to do through our Supercharge machine, there's one last thing which has perhaps the highest ranking factor, the one with the most weight of any, and that is your page Google mobile friendly or not? The reason you need mobile friendly pages is they are only included in the results list when the search was done from a phone, if they're mobile friendly. Let's try that again. Only mobile friendly pages are included in the results list if the search was done by a phone. And 50% of searches are done by phone, which means that unless your page is mobile friendly, you could be missing out on 50% of your opportunities to reach a customer. It's very, very easy to do mobile friendly testing. You type in here, Google mobile friendly test, type that into your browser, and this thing comes up right away. And you see here, it says, is your web page mobile friendly? You copy and paste your page URL. Again, this is a page by page thing. You got to do every page individually. Placed it in here and then push run test. If it's mobile friendly, after about 1 or 2 minutes, takes a little bit of time, but not much, you will get this nice green check mark that says, yes, you're good to go. However, if it's not considered mobile friendly, you will get a list of what's wrong with it. And I would strongly encourage you to go and act on all these things, because as I say, you've got to pass this test or you won't end up in the results list. Things that would cause that is if the text is too small to be readable on a phone. Google is checking this against not only the latest iPhone, it's checking it against old Android phones, all sorts of different things. And so it's going to be wondering if it's a responsive design that looks good on a mobile screen. Is the text too close together? Can you reach the buttons? Does the navigation work? What is the speed to load on your phone? All those things are incorporated into this test. And if you failed on any of those, it will tell you. Again, this is a huge ranking factor. And so I wanted to bring it to your attention. I put together here a summary of what we've talked about. Here were the search engine optimization steps that I am encouraging you to start with because they cover so many of the ranking factors. We picked the right keyword, which is what people type in. We put them in the best places with a formula. We enhanced our credibility with these links, and we got more and longer page views with these other things. I've listed the feedback analytics that I would recommend because I thought it might be hard for you to remember what the names were. For example, there are many, many reports in Search Console. This happened to be the page position report. I'm sorry, the query report, which gave us page position. In the analytics, we had both the channel report and the page view report that we talked about. So this is a reference for you when you go to do this yourself. In about a week, this webinar will be out on our SCORE YouTube channel. And there you can fast forward to this chart if you want and use it as a quick reference guide when you go to implement your own. Like a lot of things, if you were building a house, having the right tools makes a big difference. While you're building a business, having the right tools make a difference. I hope that this helps you have the right tools. We wish you great success with your business, and we look forward to seeing you on the first page. John, are you there?
Yeah, Margaret, I'm here. So we have a couple of questions. One was about, I think it's about, well, it's saying from where inside of Google Analytics do you access the Google Search Console?
Google Search Console is a separate product from Google Analytics. They're two separate ones, and both of them have to be installed. They're free, but they have to be installed. Now you can link the two once you have them, but start out with them separate.
Okay, so the other question was, how do you get them installed? What needs to happen in order for those to exist for your website?
All right. Well, you can get them from Google. You go to Google's website, do a Google search. What else is there? Go to Google, and they will have the data, the programs there for you to download. And they have a great deal of documentation online that tells you how to try to do it yourself. And you can do that. What you will get is a little code, and you insert that code on every single page of your website. And that's how it knows how to collect data. However, if you've never done it, or if you're not very techy, it might be worth a few dollars for you to pay somebody who's done it before. It's a lot easier that way. It takes somebody who knows what they're doing, perhaps an hour, depending on the size of your website. It's not a big lengthy thing, but that's essentially how Google gets the data specifically from your website into that package.
Okay. So also a question here, how do we label a picture or a video? And I think this was the alt text, if I'm not mistaken, what they're talking about. But there also is a label, I think, isn't there? Or there's a couple things on pictures. One is if you move your cursor over, it'll say something. And another is if you're using the things for accessibility, it might say it, but is that the alt text? Is that how that all works?
Alt text is used for accessibility. That is true. The alt text is specifically something for the search engine algorithm. It depends on how your website is implemented. When you're writing, if you were implementing the website yourself, there are a lot of different things that you have access to. And let's say you have WordPress. Let's say your website is WordPress. there's a really nice free plugin that you can get for WordPress. The one I like is called Yoast, spelled like toast except with a Y. And it makes it really easy for you to do all these things. It has places for you to enter your headers. It has places for you to write your little section for the SERP on the results page. It has a place for you to put in your alt text for your various images. So it makes it very easy for you to do this. Now, if you have different packages, whether you use Wix or Weebly or many other choices, they have different mechanisms where they let you put in the identification of your images. And so it sort of depends a little bit on how it's been implemented, what you have access to. What you don't want is something that's in the image, because the search engine will not be able to read text that's part of the image. It reads this other thing that's in addition to the image.
So we have a question here. What is metadata and how do we use it?
Metadata is the term. I don't know if I can get back to it. Let's see if I can get back to it. Metadata is specifically this thing here. That when you do a Google search, you'll get a whole list of these things. And this one is called the title. And this stuff underneath it is metadata. Not to be confused with meta tags. This is metadata, and it's where you put your keywords. It goes in the results page. If you go back to here. Okay, so here, this is the title in blue. This stuff is the metadata. By the way, a tip is you should put the keyword far to the left, and your company name should be further to the right. You can see here, like Walmart, depending on the size of the screen that someone is doing a search on, Google will cut off the whole right-hand side. And so the suggestion is you put the keyword over on the left so it will never get cut off. And once they click on it, they'll know it's you. But keep all the keywords on the left. It'll chop off the right depending on screen size. And all this black text are everybody's metadata. And you can see that Google themselves have come through and bolded this. The person did not put these in bold. Google does. It's telling you, oh, I found your words in here. And every time it finds one of the words that I typed in, it's going to bold it in the metadata.
And what is a meta tag? This is what someone is asking now.
A meta tag is yet another one of those techie things, which used to be important, but Google felt that people were misusing it by putting in far too many. And so from an SEO standpoint, it is no longer considered a particularly important ranking factor.
Okay, so here's a specific question that you may or may not be able to answer. My Google Analytics always says not set for the referral sources. So I don't know where the traffic is coming from. How can I fix that?
Referral says not set. Is it truly so the first question would be, is it truly an external link? It could be. I don't know. I've never had that particular problem. I've had the one where it's coming from an email and it gets incorporated in with direct rather than being specified as an email, because you actually have to put a special little notation in your link from an email so that it gets registered in Google Analytics. I have never had that happen personally with the referrals. The referrals have always worked for me, so I guess I cannot answer that question. I don't know.
Okay, fair enough. And I would say maybe an answer is to Google that.
Google it, of course. That's always the answer.
Right. And see, although you may have already done that, but there are forums and help groups for Google Analytics within the overall Google universe there. So they may be able to help on that. Let's see. So let me see. We got a lot of questions here, Margaret. What is a Google Tag Manager and how do we use it?
I would say
Familiar
that's
with-
way out of the scope of our SEO conversation for this evening.
Okay, so I would say Google that and find out, right?
Yes.
Okay. Any idea on how to install Google Analytics on a site built using Squarespace? Squarespace being one of those website building tools that are out there.
Yes. You might find, I don't know specifically about Squarespace, but one of the things you can find out is sometimes they won't let you. If they have their own analytics package that they want you to use, sometimes they do not encourage you to put in the real Google one because they are taking Google data, they're reformatting it and using it as their own analytics package. So you might check that, but you should be able to Google whether or not you can add Google Analytics to Squarespace. I've never heard of one really that you cannot, although I did have one person who had to work at it a little bit to give them permission to use it in parallel with the one that came with their particular platform.
Yeah. So, as just a general answer to that, like you said, you really do need to get a hold of whoever it is that built your website or whatever tool, and they will have those answers. I know with hosting services like GoDaddy, I believe that they have help groups or help documents on how to set up Google Analytics. So here's a question that we should ask is, can people set up one-on-one with any of the SCORE mentors? And the answer is yes, absolutely. Please go to our SCORE website, which is northchicago.score.org. And there will be Find a Mentor is one of the sections in there. And you can search for mentors specifically by name, or you can search by areas of expertise. And let's see, what else do we have? Yes, the recording will be available after the meeting. It will be available within a week. Let's see what else we have here. Got a lot of good questions, Margaret.
I'd like to think that's because of interest, not because I did a poor job.
Well, there's a lot of people with a lot of interest in, once you spark their interest in the idea that there is such a thing as Google Analytics and Google Search Console, we got a host of questions about how do you get to it.
All right.
So
well, let me talk about Google Analytics just for a minute. I told you that all these examples are from Google Analytics Universal. That's the one that's been around for many years. Millions of companies literally use it. And I feel it's extremely well positioned for small businesses because you saw, I hope, how well it matched the kinds of questions that we want as a small business to get ourselves on the right page, to know if anyone's coming, to know what in the world we're supposed to put as those keywords. I find it extremely useful for that type of business. Google has come out with a new one called G4, was introduced formally in October. And they want everybody to migrate to this new one. Google Universal will be discontinued in 18 months. So there's only another 18 months before they force everybody to switch over to G4. The difference with G4, in my opinion, maybe it's just because I'm used to the old one, is that it is much more designed for a much more sophisticated channel pattern than most small businesses are starting with. It would work great for somebody like United Airlines. What it does is it takes, for companies that have an app, which is different than their webpage. So the United website talks about booking your flights and your frequent flyer miles and all this kind of stuff. And the one that comes on your phone has more emphasis on what gate are you going to be in, show this to the TSA people to get through security, They're not identical. And this G4 combines all these different sources of data into one big lump. They no longer will tell you what pages were looked at. They're not interested in pages anymore. They're interested in activities. So it's very, very different. So if you're going to go out, and I hope I have inspired you to get Google Analytics, the Universal is still available. And I would encourage you to start with that. But you can have both. You can have both running concurrently. And that way you can learn how to interpret this very, very different approach out of G4. So if you were to go out tomorrow morning and sign up for Google Analytics, you have to specify, the default is G4. So you have to specify that you still want Universal and get that, learn it, get your business up and running. And then you can start using G4 in parallel to understand this completely different terminology, which doesn't talk about pages. It doesn't talk about any of those things anymore. It's just very, very different. But I need to alert you to that.
So another question here before we leave is how do you find out what your competitors, what keywords they're using? Is there a way to do that?
Oh yes, that's easy. Google Keyword Planner has a specific report. You can type in either the competitor's homepage and say, check the entire website, or you can say, just check this competitor's specific pages, and it will tell you all the keywords that it finds out there. And you can get a big long list from anybody's website. They can also get it about you, by the way.
Okay, interesting. So you can find out just by putting in their website. Now that will be, as you said before, you need to do that for every page potentially in their website, but
No.
for the homepage it's good enough.
No,
Well,
on that particular report, you have a choice. You could say, do the entire site, and you only have to type in the homepage and set, but click on the thing that says entire site, and it will give you the entire site.
Oh, okay, fantastic. That is good here. So up on the screen now is a QR code. If you have a smartphone, and who doesn't these days, you can take a picture of that and it will take you directly to our North Chicago Score.org website where you can find a mentor. So we encourage you to do that. We have a lot, as we said, we have 70 mentors in our chapter. There are over 11,000 across the country. If we don't have the expertise in our chapter, then you can do a keyword search, and almost all of the SCORE chapters are doing virtual mentoring these days. So that means that you can get a mentor in Cleveland or Cincinnati or wherever you see one with the right level of expertise that you want. Margaret, thank you very much for the session here. Let me see, we got one more question. Oh, it's a thank you. So that is good. And we've got a lot of really good information here. And as I said, it will be available on our YouTube channel within a week. And if there are no other questions, we'll let everybody go about their what is today? Thursday? Their Thursday evening. And oh, let's see. Someone raised a hand. Warren. Let me see here. Not sure. Well, yeah, Warren raised a hand. Could you put your question in the chat, Warren? I'm trying to find out where we can find you here. Oh, okay. Thank you. Again, got a lot of thank yous, Margaret. A lot of people, I think, really appreciated the information that you got here. It was a lot of stuff. So as you said earlier in the presentation, go to the YouTube channel and watch it there. You can stop it. You can take pictures of the slides. You can digest whatever it is that you have. And that's always a good way to get additional information about this. So, all right. So thank you very much, Margaret, and thank you to our sponsors. And we have another couple of webinars. We have these once a month. How to choose and buy the right franchise is on May 17th. And then Cybersecurity 101 for small businesses is on June 2nd. So thanks again for joining us this evening. And we will see you at another presentation. Good night.